Give me a thumbs up. Hey there, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to Esoteric Side, the podcast and institution where we strengthen and increase the consciousness of our community by starting a dialogue about esoteric wisdom, psychology, spirituality in practical ways so you guys can apply it in your everyday lives. I'm Dr. Alex Saldana. I'm a therapist and astrologer, and with me today is my co-host Whitney, who's a Kundalini yoga instructor, massage therapist, among other things, also studying astrology. Whitney, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure for you to co-host this. And who's our guest today?
Today we have another Ask Uncle Vlad.
I love these Ask Uncle Vlad sessions.
So our guest.
That's the name of the show.
Ask Uncle Vlad.
The world according to me.
Yeah. So our guest today is Vladimir Angert, and this is like the 4th episode with him.
Yeah, and just to give some context, like normally when we ask Vlad things, well, sometimes his personality and understanding and consciousness will pop through because he's kind of a rough and tough dude. But he's also he also channels directly from Source God. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Before we introduce the topic, Vlad, first, how are you, man?
I'm doing well.
Can you walk us through normally what your process is when we ask you a question before we get is it stuff that's already stored in there? Do you channel? Where do you channel from? What's your
So your teacher and my uncle makes fun of me that as I always make this statement, when I lecture or when I talk to people, they'll say to me, "How do you know?" I say, "I really don't know very much. I have a 9th grade education. I either know or I don't know." So I don't. So the statement is, I don't think. There's nothing to think about. It happens in spite of me. I'm not, the self-proclaimed guru channeling information. I'm just so not in my head that I receive constant answers to whatever questions you have, and you can check with whatever sources you have that you trust and believe in, people that really are an authority on otherworldly concepts, and you'll see that they resonate with people who studied Kabbalah or Taoism or Hinduism or Buddhism. It doesn't matter. They're all just vibrational ways of looking at reality.
That's awesome. So what we're speaking today is what happens when someone passes away and there's something unresolved baggage with that person, and the person that's still here in this physical reality has to process that, right? So me and Whitney were actually talking about a couple of examples because my mom got angry that I spoke about her last session, and she was like, "Why would you tell people that my mom, went through physically and mentally abused me?" And I was like, "Well, Mom, no one knows you, But I think I'm going to speak about her again today, just because that's what I do. So I think she's so in her head about having to have a good version of her mom in her head that she completely doesn't want to acknowledge how much harm she did, right? And I think that was her difficulty in processing that. But Whitney also was speaking about her mom's issue. So I think this is a very common thing when a parent or when anyone passes away, a husband, and there's unsolved baggage to deal and go through. What do you recommend, or how do you walk through this process with your clients?
The first obstacle, I think the first piece of advice, I think is the most important, is not to assume the role of God. What does that mean? It means not to contemplate what you could have done. Something could have done better. I could have done more. Things could have been different. I should have said what I needed to say. Every soul has a process. Every soul has its goal. Every soul has, the body chooses the process. And so and has choices every day. And so there's nothing that you or your mother could have done to solve anything, because when a person's not well or sick or crashes in an accident, there was nothing to do. We have a mutual friend, Whitney and I, who was adorable, super smart, kind, gentle, a gentle giant, a sweetheart. I love the kid. He just was a fuck up. You couldn't get it together. Anything you could ask him for his pants while he was wearing them, he would take them off and give them to you. But he couldn't get it together. He crashed and died. And his brother died, what, 2 years prior to that? 3 years?
I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years prior.
So there's nothing to resolve. That was his process. His mother could not have done more. Whitney could not have done more. I was always, the door was always open for him to talk to me, to resolve. It wasn't part of his reality. That's what he chose. And so he left this world the way he left. Some of us leave through car accidents. Some of us choke to death. I have a grandmother who was constantly holding her breath, waiting for the Nazis to come back. When we moved to the States, we lived in Brooklyn, New York. She would shut off her refrigerator so it wouldn't make noise. So I'd say, Mom, how come, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? She said, what if they come? I say, who? The Germans, Nazis. So she was holding her breath, constantly waiting for it to happen again. You know how she died? She choked to death. So they fed her in the nursing home facility and put her to bed, and she choked to death. It took her 5 minutes to die. Why? Because of the choices she made in life. She never overcame that fear. She never overcame that fatalist mentality, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always waiting for disaster, always. You know. So there's nothing for us to do. It's they who choose. You leave this world, how do you live in this world? And the moment you assume the weight of the disaster or the circumstances or the incident, I have a dear friend who I don't speak to anymore, but he was 21 years old when he bought a very fancy sports car. And he took a girl out on a date, and the last thing she said to him was, slow down. And he crashed into a tree on a turn. She died and he lived. And until this day, I mean, he has enormous capacity to co-create, but he judges himself. I think maybe he's over it at this point, but the parents never forgave him because he killed their daughter. They blame him for it. The parents will never accept that it was her time. Nobody wants to accept that it's a 21-year-old's time. And so the kid, he's such an incredible businessman. Such an incredible entrepreneur. But he takes it right there, and it all falls apart. And enormous deals, enormous, in the hundreds of millions. And it always falls apart. He manages to make a living somehow. Why? Because he's still in judgment of himself, insinuating that he could have done something different. Yeah, he could have, but he didn't. He lived and she died. So then his responsibility is to take responsibility for his life and do something correct. Two people don't have to die in the process. If it was intended for him to die, he would have, but he didn't. Certainly he could have driven slowly, but he didn't. So things are the way they are. Certainly it can make him, it leaves an empty space in you when you are responsible for something like that. But if you don't get over it and accept that it's somehow the soul's intention to leave this world in some way, some people fall asleep and not wake up. If you don't accept that it's the soul's intention and that's the process, then you're assuming the role of God. You're assuming that you're judging their experience and you're insinuating that it could have been somehow different, but it wasn't. And so there we are. So as long as you continue to consume yourself with the idea that you could have done something better or could have done different or could have done more, you are God. You're judging their experience. Even the creative force doesn't judge. That's all crap created by mediocre organized religions that say, oh, God is judging us. It doesn't judge anything. It's not a person. It's not a quality that it has. It's we who judge ourselves. So, and then we assume the role of the creator because I'm saying that this guy should not have been, this kid should not have died. He was a young dude, smart, big, strong, resourceful, always, really deep, really miserably deep.
Yeah, perfect description.
Miserably deep.
Yeah.
That's a Vladaism. But superhuman being. I mean,
It's very Pisces of you, sir, by the way.
Yeah, he's a Pisces.
He was a Pisces, yeah.
He was a Pisces. But he couldn't get past himself. So he died. He crashed with all his guns in his car. It's the way, if you think about it, it's the way he would have wanted to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Flying through the highway, speeding, he flipped over.
Yeah, he wasn't even, not to divert, but he was driving like completely normally, probably for the only time of his life.
Yeah, he's a maniac on the road. So the point is, I don't want to take up conversation, personal stories, but I can tell you that the first thing you want to do is accept. It sounds cliche and like a justification to take the weight off yourself, but everything is God's will. Everything. Whatever it is, it's constantly creating through us. So if we don't live a life that's in alignment with it, and we don't fuel our souls, and we live in some sort of fear, right? That fear then consumes us, and we manifest that reality for ourselves. That's how my grandmother choked to death. She was always holding her breath.
And I have a friend who, he's 60 something now, but he crashed into a Big Mac truck. And he broke like almost every bone in his body. He was in a cast for months, had to really learn how to walk. Walks with limp now. And he didn't die. I mean, he should have died. It's never should or shouldn't have, right? Yeah. But like everything in your conscious mind says this kind of accident equals death, and he didn't. He got another chance to restructure his life, right? It was
literally.
Yeah, exactly. And he crashed, like he knew, like in his heart of heart, that he shouldn't be going to Mexico City. He should stay where he was at and do another plan. But he was frustrated and whatever, and he was pushing through that. He was going the wrong way in his life, literally. And he crashed into a Big Mac truck, and he had to restructure everything he was, right? So his soul chose not to exit there, where 21-year-old entire life ahead of her. You think, obviously it wasn't her time, but for some reason it was.
That's not true.
Yeah.
To insinuate that it wasn't someone's time is if you're insinuating that they somehow have an expiration date.
Yeah.
And that what the expiration date. Remember, we use up our vital resource, the energy that's provided for us to sustain ourselves in the human experience. We use it up with all our fears and insanities, and the daily ups and downs and our obsessions. And then if we have a call to godliness, I had a call to godliness. I had an incident to let go of my past. It severed the incident, severed all the tendons in my hand. My hand was hanging. If I don't heed to what's happening and I don't see the value of it, then I continue going at the same pace, and I end up having to pay a bigger price, because everything comes with a price. It's not as if it's a punishment from the creative force. It's just a result of my behavior, right? So then we choose how we lead. We choose how we live. I hope that makes sense.
He's frozen. He's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about this subject because we were originally before you came on, we were talking about when you have these like for my dad, for example, my best friend, greatest guy ever. I love him dearly, and I'm not speaking ill. the other side of him was like, I've seen this man throw human beings through walls and just like hit people with 2x4s. So there was like this split of like his personality, who he could be. And at the end of his life, he got sober, he was fine. But we never really like had harsh discussions to go through to like work through that shit. And then he died. And then I just sunk into this, like, I was mad at him. I was trying to like process all this myself after he left. And then when I met you and we were talking about it, you were like, listen, you got to let this motherfucker rest. Like, you can't keep doing this. Just, he's dead. Just like, you got to let him rest, you know? And it was true. It was a true statement. But I just want to kind of speak to that. Like, how does a person go about processing these things, these harsh things that maybe they didn't have? I never wanted to make him feel bad. He always would feel bad after he would act insane. He would be like upset with himself. So I never wanted to make him feel bad for having done that, you know? So how do you go through that process?
Listen, nothing can prepare someone for losing a loved one. Nothing. No matter how much you think you know, how much you think you understand about this experience or any other, or otherworldly things or concepts. You lose a loved one, a parent or a child, God forbid, or anything. You know my older kid's story, right? So he got blown up. I didn't think I'd feel anything. I didn't see him for 15 years. I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up and touch my head as if I lost a portion of my head, because we're connected through, energetically connected. He's my son. I don't have that kind of relationship with him like I have with Theo. You know? I'd turn the world upside down for Theo. This kid gets on my nerves. I disconnect myself. I don't talk to him for years. But what you're asking is, how do we deal with? You have to accept something. It's a very interesting concept. That your judgment of their experience, how they left, and what you haven't said to them, keeps them grounded, because you're spiritually and emotionally connected. The soul can't move forward. It attends to you. You understand? That's why the Jews have what's called Shiva. They sit Shiva and they pray and they say the Kaddish. Kaddish is a mourner's prayer. What does it do? It raises your vibration, because while you're saying it, you're receiving, and it raises the vibration of the soul that's now moved into the spiritual experience. And we remove ourselves from doing for 7 days so we can acclimate or understand that this person is physically no longer here. Right? It takes 7 days. People jump into work and doing. It's going to ooze out somewhere. The loss is going to ooze out somewhere. You can't jump into it, because it's something that you need to experience emotionally and intellectually understand. So the praying, instead of dwelling and asking yourself what you could have done, what could have been different, how did it happen, who's responsible, people look for obstacles and look to make drama. Somebody died, someone I knew, her mother died in the hospital. Certainly the hospital is responsible, but there's still a divine plan, right? She lived constantly in an abusive marriage. She abused herself. She was overweight. She didn't take care of herself. She didn't eat correctly. She left this world. Her intestines imploded. Certainly the hospital had something to do with it, right? But the moment you start judging that experience, and thinking in the human experience, oh, it could have been different. It could have, but it wasn't. Let's accept that. I could have not married Theo's mother, but I did. So then I have no regrets of having Theo. They're not mistakes. Theo and Luella are not mistakes, right? So then this person that left that we know, and your dad, it was their time. It was their date to go. You know, I think I talked about this already. I had an office across the street from World Trade Center Building 1, 112 Liberty Street. 6 months prior, I left. Why? Because I knew something? No, I had no idea about anything. I had a little disagreement with the guy whose office I was using. He was a friend, a chiropractor. I didn't like the crowd. I didn't like the financial vibe doing my thing in that area. And I left. 6 months later, it all blew up. My ex-wife was scheduled for a meeting in building 1 or 2, I'm not sure. American Express Custom Publishing, their headquarters was in building 1 or 2, but one of them. She overslept. She didn't make the meeting. We were both at home on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I know at least 30 people that missed the train, overslept, called in sick, didn't make it, whatever their reason was, it wasn't their day. And then 3,000 people, it was their day, and that's it. You can blame whoever you want. The circumstance is just the vehicle for the passing. So once you accept that, then you say, okay, well, even if they off themselves, it's in their process. Why do people off themselves? Because there's no possibility of resolve in their understanding. But once you understand, if you're in denial that there is a creative force and that you have a soul and that it's not up to you to end that experience. When you end that experience, you move into the spiritual realm and replay moments of your last moments over and over again until you recognize that there's another space to move into. And that happens as a result of our letting go and us praying for them and ourselves. The praying has to happen for ourselves because as we pray, we receive energy, which then emotionally we start to let go. The energy fuels our hearts and our minds and envelops our nervous system when we finally accept, it's not by chance and they left and I'm here and they're there and I have to make the best of my life while I'm living. Thank God that I'm living. The people that do like overdose or shoot themselves or hang themselves, that's complete denial that there is a God, which means when the soul moves into the spiritual experience, it doesn't recognize the next step. So it dwells in the human experience in spirit form. That's what the Catholics call eternal damnation. They're not in eternal damnation. They're fine. They just don't recognize their environment. They still think they're physical. And eventually they move forward anyway. They're not punished by any means. They're not doomed or damned. That's all bullshit. Some guy who lost his daughter in Africa, he's pretty well known. His daughter fell off a cliff in Africa and he had gotten on Oprah and he actually changed California's policies about morgues. He had a law passed that every morgue had to have like a little room for where you can console and you have a practitioner on staff that could talk to you. I mean, morgues are insane. You walk in, there's this body and you identify it. It's horrifying. So he told me, my buddy told him, listen, why don't you invite Vlad to speak at one of your gatherings? And he has a huge following, at least he had at that time. And he said, Vlad, I'm so terrified to invite mediums. I called this woman who claimed herself to be a medium. And she spoke to like 300 women who lost their kids either to suicide or car accidents. And she said that the ones that killed themselves are in eternal damnation. How do you say that to a group of moms? You have to be so out of touch with reality and so backwards. Nobody's in eternal damnation. No one. If you're a murderer, then you assume the role of God. You're taking a life, which means you assume that there is no flow. So you sever your connection and you're relegated into strictly living the human experience which eventually consumes you. And sometimes not. There are Nazis living in Argentina that were, in charge of crematoriums in the during the Holocaust in the camps. They're still alive. They killed hundreds of millions of people, responsible for hundreds of deaths, and they're still alive. Go figure that out. Why? Because there is no punishment and reward. It's bullshit. The creative flow doesn't punish anything. You can sever your connection. And if you're okay with what you're doing, if you can live with yourself, well, a lot of these guys, I don't know if you know who John Gotti was, right? He's, the godfather of the Gambino family in the 90s. Right? The guy was a sweetheart. He was a known good guy. Everybody loved him. He was like our mafia hero. His son went to my military academy. And he was from Bensonhurst. That's what I was from. John sat for 200 days and watched his best friend testify that he turned states. Gravano testified against him, said that he had him kill 19 people, which I'm sure there were tons more. John never said one word. Not one word in 200 days. They put him 15 feet underground. He died of throat cancer for all the things he didn't say. But until then, he was jolly, fun guy, always loving. I mean, straight up gangster, and he loved it. But he wasn't judging himself about killing guys that didn't want to pay, or union leaders, or whatever it is that he did in his daily life. He didn't judge himself. He had an intent. He pursued it, and it paid him. And he wasn't judging himself. So the response, remember, when you sever someone's life, you assume the role of God, and then you sever your connection. So your soul stops receiving. And when you're done using up your personal supply, you go away.
So in this instance, this was like one of the things that you said when I first started learning from you, like you have to have some kind of moral standards that you live by. This is why you need some kind of religious life or rituals, because this, like, if you understand you're not being divinely punished or rewarded, you could just be an asshole, like a psychotic asshole or whatever. But
there's tons of them out there.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's what I feel like that's what the world leaders are, is just like people who understand this. But
there's one that was realized that wasn't an asshole.
Let's not get political here.
Well, I'm curious now, and I mean, we might step on some toes, but we're going to do that anyway.
Donald Trump was a realized person, and he wasn't an asshole. Okay. You might think he's an asshole because he said he wanted to grab somebody's pussy, forgive me. But in the locker room or amongst each other, we can say that shit, but all of a sudden when it becomes public knowledge, everybody knew he sponsored a beauty pageant. Everybody knew he was a casino guy. Everybody knew what he did. We know him from Brooklyn. Everyone knows who Donald Trump was, that he speaks like a Brooklynite. He's a simple guy, but he's honorable. What he did, he went into business, he lost business. How many guys you know that are in office that are taking payments, doing God knows what, this moron that's in office? I don't even want to get into that. But
I mean, I think
Trump is fully realized. He understands the power of deliberate intent. He understands how it functions. And he didn't go and create more conflict and go to another country and create more beef. He gathered this country because he loves it and really did something for it.
I think like the question is the populace ever ready for an authentic individual?
No,
because what they want is a individual with no flaws, or like with only flaws that they find acceptable. So like until people can be authentic with themselves, they're never going to have an authentic leader.
Remember, when you're in that position, right, you're not by yourself. You got a bunch of other assholes that are taking advantage of where they are. They're in office for too long. They're getting paid more than they're supposed to. They're taking bribes. They're on boards of banks. They're on boards of major companies that are making billions of dollars. So he's not by himself up there realized, and the rest of them are below him. They're also realized. And they don't want to help the public because to them, we're just sheep. We're disposable.
Yeah.
But well, for example,
I want to get off this dead subject.
Yeah,
I would get political.
We veered a little bit off track, but for example, I think what bothered some people about with Donald Trump is their own projection of themselves, because a lot of patients, clients are like, "Oh, I hate this guy." It's like, why do you hate about him? Well, he's such an egotistical maniac. Like, how are you an egotistical maniac, you know? Projecting people, like your own thing on other people. And I think he was just excessively confident and didn't really question a couple of things, but that was probably my own
That's why
projection.
he was confident, because he was realized.
That could be. I do want to make a big comment though on how you explained spiritual technology, because there is this phrase being thrown around with a lot of yogis that say, you know, there is like yoga and all these things is a technology, right? And how you explained it is there is actually like a flow of energy that we can't see, channel that we can't see, stuff going on other planes. And when you pray, when you do something, when consciousness will modify that, and that flow of energy will change your nervous system and your body and everything, right? So I loved how you explained that. But and you said first step is stop playing God, stop judging. Something happened and it was perfect, right? We made they made the best choice they could. Now, before we go on to whatever you think step two is, there are people that take their own life, and that is difficult for a lot of people to process. But I think a lot of the psychological subconscious root of illness, and I think even, you know, Resnick says this, you know, cancer is an accepted form of suicide. How do you treat and view suicide? And are all illnesses like cancer, like that, just like the soul saying, okay, it's time to go? And are all deaths really suicide in some form because your soul is making the decision?
Diagnosis of cancer is not a death sentence. It's not true. The reason he might insinuate that it's suicide because of what people choose. They choose radiation and chemotherapy and then destroy themselves, and there's no chance of survival. And the medical community knows that it doesn't work. They still do it. If it works and when it worked, and then it reappears in a different place. So it didn't work. You understand? But
No, I think more so than that, he's implying, because when, for example, some people lose meaning in their life, or they lose whatever, right? And then they get, or something happens, and then they get cancer, right? So, okay, my life is over. I don't have meaning in my life anymore. This big thing happened, and then cancer starts to grow in them, and like that's my exit ticket out of here, subconsciously, unconsciously.
I'll give you a couple of examples. One is I saw a woman from mediumship recently. Her son, who was an athlete, in phenomenal shape, 30 years old, beautiful girlfriend, lived in Miami in a great apartment. The parents are well-to-do. He was into water sports, but he smoked weed and popped pills all the time. He went in his hot tub, had a drink and some Xanax, fell asleep and drowned. You can't get past that. What do you mean it was his time? You should have seen him. He was this, he was that. I mean, literally, like, screaming at him. But if you think about the guy, right, I'm just going to address this for a moment, so I'm sure a lot of people will be able to relate. If you think about it, he wasn't a great guy. He was miserable because he was numbing himself constantly. And he was preventing himself from emotionally growing or having any kind of relationship with the creative force by smoking weed and drinking and abusing himself. So he wasn't okay. He just appeared to be okay because he looked good and had a nice friend, all right? So he literally, what is water? It's emotion. He drowned in his emotions. So it's not as if it was some punishment. It was a result of the way he lived. So no mother wants to hear that. But then let's take it a step further. She didn't engage him in an observant life. She didn't give him emotional tools on how to be. She bought him apartments. She bought him cars. She paid his bills. She paid it. He's a 30-year-old guy who never developed, who was emotionally arrested at the age of 18, at 30, living like an 18-year-old. Water skiing on his jet ski every day, hanging out with his girl, smoking weed, going to the beach. I mean, that could be a life for a slacker. I don't care how much money you have to have a sense of purpose. So where's the sense of purpose? So he left the way he lived. But certainly you can't explain that to the mother. She just lost her child that she adored. She doesn't want to hear that. But she didn't contribute in any way. She never engaged him in learning how to resolve his emotions so that he doesn't have to numb himself. So he was numb and he left in water. It's how he would have wanted to die. You follow?
A professor of mine in med school, he was obsessed with death, right? And he was I forget what the term is in English, forensic doctor, and he loved like seeing how people died and interpreting how that their view for life was, right? And he was showing a lot of different ways that people died, very graphic scenes, and one of them was this girl that jumped into a garbage can, right, into a dumpster, and she was like, wait, this girl like thought that she was trash, and that's how she ended her life. You know, she was ODing and she jumped into. So I find that very, very interesting. So what do you think step 2 would be? Well, one is you mentioned not playing God, accept it. You know, it happened.
I wanted to answer the rest of your question, and I kind of,
yes,
of course, please tell me remind me what it is that you asked, because it was really interesting. And
suicide. We're speaking that if
I wanted to tell you, it's very interesting.
Cancer, yeah.
In the 1980s, there was a show on television called Fantasy Island. And there were two characters, Ricardo Montalban and Hervé Villachez. The guy used to go, "Be playing, boss, be playing." Remember? So I was in an acting class in New York City, and Hervé Villachez had slit his wrists in a bathtub and died. And he appeared in my acting class in spirit and followed me around for 3 days and taught me about suicide. That's how I know about suicide. I never told you that, right? You know, so I mean, out of all people, I could never understand why it was him. But Tattoo was a little person. He was a short guy, and he explained the workings of it and how the soul leaves the human experience and what its denial is and what it prevents itself from doing and how it embraces and the legacy it leaves behind. And so it's all intended for everyone to, it's kind of what I call a call to spirit. You know, there's no other way to describe it, because if the person has children and they commit suicide, they take themselves out of this world. I have another interesting story that I just thought of. A friend of mine who's a physician called me. Oh, this wasn't a suicide. He called me and said, "Look, you know, my 6-year-old wakes up at 11 o'clock every day at night. And she starts running around the house aimlessly, speaking a different language and peeing on herself. And nobody can stop her. And this guy is 200 plus pounds, 6'1". He couldn't stop her. And he says, you know, Vlad, we didn't want to tell you, but we have no choice because it's happening now over and over again for almost a year, or maybe even longer." So when I looked, I saw an attachment. What is an attachment? It means that the 6-year-old is a very, very high frequency and energy soul that lives in a household where there is no ritual life or elevated vibration, meaning there's no prayer, there's no ritual, there's no devotion. They're just people who are getting by. They're very well off, these people. He's a physician, but there's no religious affiliation or belief system. So children of families like that, they don't have an allegiance to anything, and there's no consistent methodology through which they're sustained spiritually. So if the child is very sensitive, there could be an attachment happen. They're vulnerable. There's souls roaming around constantly that have not accepted their process, right? So what was happening is there was a girl attached to her that was from Serbia, and someone was chasing her through the forest to kill her. And she was playing out the last moments of her life through this kid. And she would speak that language, Serbian, or the Czechoslovakian. And so, I mean, I helped them, but it's kind of what happens to suicide. I helped them by praying for the little girl and raising her vibration. And so the soul that's attached itself, it doesn't recognize light, so it detaches itself and either continues on to the next step, or it continues to dwell in the human experience and replay its last moments in that happened to her. But it's kind of that's what Harvey Valenciez explained to me. Because there's a denial about a spiritual realm or spiritual life or a God or a being or a soul, is that denial, that practical attachment to the human experience is what allows this person to take their own life. You could say, well, it was in their process. It was in their life's plan. They made that contract. All those kumbaya spiritualists who love mediums, it was in their contract. It's in our contract to either be an asshole or to be a nice person. You choose what's in your contract. You know what I mean? So the soul comes into the human experience with possibilities, the evil inclination or a good inclination. You can choose what you want to be and what inclination you want to feed, right? So just to insinuate that, it was in the DNA of this soul to commit suicide, bullshit. Maybe it was, but they followed that choice. They had a choice to make in this human experience. We all do, moment to moment, day to day, all the time. So when we choose to take ourselves out of here, the shock and the recognition of the person that takes themselves out of this world, that they are no longer in the human experience and now they're in spirit form, they cannot go back. They desperately cling to that human experience because then now they've recognized that they've ended themselves and ended their experience. You understand? So they relive the last moment over and over again, trying to make sense of how that happened. I'm going to repeat myself. They are not in eternal damnation. Nobody's going to punish them. Eventually, if you pray for them, you raise their vibration, they recognize that there is the next step in the spiritual realm, and they move on like everybody else. Nobody's doomed. You understand? So I hope that answers the question. I hope I addressed.
As far as suicide does go, that answers it perfectly. As far as other illnesses, such as cancer or whatever,
let's address that.
Yeah, being the sole decision to, okay, I'm going to check out of here because it's my time or whatever. I think Resnick once said that he had a man that was grieving because he lost his wife and he couldn't find any sense in her death. And he mentioned okay, so what would have happened if you would have died? And then what would happen to your wife if you died first? And he said, well, I think she would have suffered endlessly. It would have been horrible for her. It was don't you think the point then to her death might have been saving, was not going through that suffering? Or the fact that she chose to exit first was that you chose, am I making my point clear? I don't think I'm phrasing it.
He was trying to help him reframe it.
Yeah, helping him reframe it through
Listen, everybody has their method of reframing and dealing, and all therapists and practitioners insinuate that they know. I can only speak for myself. I'm a medium since I'm 12 years old. I can talk to dead people standing on my head. It's not an achievement. It's not all these self-aggrandized mediums that write books. It's all bullshit. My 5-year-old can do it. It's not an accomplishment, and it's not a phenomenon. We're all souls going through a human experience, and their souls going through a spiritual experience. If you can shut off your mind and stop making up stories and justifying, and work on expanding the vibration of your soul, you can talk to them as well. As long as you don't call on them and they appear for you, it's all good. So all these wannabe mediums, that's the only thing they know how to do. They don't realize that it's an increment of what's possible when you align, when you're a phenomenologist and you use your soul for otherworldly abilities, right? So my point in saying this is that, sure, I forgot the question. Oh, justifying, trying to justify somebody else's death, it's a complete waste of time. If somebody got cancer, it's a lack of understanding. I'm treating a cancer patient now. She's a sweetheart. She's super smart. She's a nice woman. She's a good mom, a good wife. There's nothing bad about her, but she has her own darkness. She overwhelmed herself. She can't process life. Everything is a conflict. Everything is worst case scenario. She eats herself up. Guess where her cancer is?
Stomach.
The belly.
Yeah.
Not the stomach. On the internal portion of the belly cancer. So that whole entire cavity is full of cancer. Why? Because not only she can't digest her life, she's consumed herself to such an extent that now the illness has taken the space of where energy should live. So there is no, she's spent her energy on worst case scenario, conflict, contemplating who's going to say what, who's going to say it to who and when, contemplating things that don't exist, living in fear, regret, guilt, expectation, anger, all those things that we're all guilty of, right? But now trying to resolve her is a whole process. And as we resolve her, she went for a blood test, all her blood work is perfect. So that means
I wasn't trying. I'm sorry, Vlad. I wasn't trying to interrupt you.
no. So as we work on these folks and resolve their emotions of what caused the issue, and we force them to work on themselves, and I mean, I don't force them, but if a patient doesn't want to do their part, I don't treat them. I'm not interested, because without their part, if they don't want to fight for their life, they're not going to survive. And she chose it. She had, this is a second round of cancer. She went to Germany, had all these tests, and she basically said to them, I'm not doing chemo again, radiation. I always tell her, look, me personally, I'd rather die on my feet than to live on my knees. And chemo and radiation and all that other shit, that's living on your knees. So you're basically a passive recipient of poison, and they're going to try to heal me with poison. I don't know what sense that makes. So she made a decision. She said, oh, I'm not interested. I'm not doing it. I'm going to go to New York, to Miami, and get alternative treatment. And she's doing it. Yoga every day, resolve every day, treatment every day. She just went to the hospital to make sure, to see how things were going, because technology can provide her with peace of mind. And all her blood tests are perfect. She's moving forward.
Well, in a case like that, I ask this because I remember I was in Florida visiting you, and you were treating an Orthodox Jewish young man from New York, and he kept asking like, yeah, I feel fine, and then when I don't do this anymore, when I don't do all the stuff I'm supposed to do, my stomach hurts again, or whatever it was, comes back. When am I done? And you were just like, what? I don't like, what does that mean? And I was like, Vlad, he's asking, like, does he have, like, how much longer does he have to do the protocol? And it's just like, this is just how you live now. Like you do yoga, you do this, you do that. For her, it, like, the requirement is maybe a little more stringent than like a person who doesn't have a body that had grown cancer or overgrown cancer cells. Is it always going to be that way for her, where she has like a heightened level of ritual requirement? Or does that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
I honestly think in her case, and it's very, very often it happens this way. In this woman's case, she's so vigilant and so intuitive, and so her intuition is so peppered with her conspiracies. Now that she's receiving resolve and seeing the reality in a different view, she could become a practitioner. It's her call to spirit. So then the lifestyle, it's not as if it's a burden for this kid. You know, he comes from an Orthodox community. He's never done yoga or did breathing exercises or had to train or run or push himself. He needs that to put up a fight against his condition. He's conditioned to be this way. And now the medical community has given him a bunch of justifications so he can say, well, I have this, I can't do anything. No. So you push yourself beyond your comfort level and you stay in that zone. Is it better to take medication and never achieve anything, never resolve anything, and never take your power back and be at the mercy of some substance? Oh, how's that different from substance abuse?
Yeah.
You understand? Here, they're learning a way. Certainly, that's why I tell them to come here, because I pull them out of their conditioned behavior and show them new tools on how to resolve, how to be self-sufficient, how to heal themselves, how to engage in receiving energy, how to pray, how to train, how to do yoga. All the tools that can sustain you, not just heal you for the moment, but that can sustain you, that you should have for the rest of your life. Look, you know my mother. Look at her. I mean, woman's 72 years old. She can outrun all three of us.
Yeah.
Her will is what keeps her healthy. She's healthy. She's, she constantly has some sort of obstacle because she needs challenges to overcome. So she creates, every couple of months, she's healing a new part. Oh, my gallbladder. The truth is, she likes to go to the medical community and say, look, I did it myself. You all said that it wasn't going to work. Here it is. My gallbladder's fine.
Right. Yeah.
So those are her challenges. I think she's running out of body parts, frankly. So now she's doing
we have to start over.
I mean, it's fine. She does 2 hours of yoga a day. She walks or runs 6 miles. She can swim for 55 minutes straight. And she looks like she's 45 at best.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because she chooses it. She's not sitting around feeling sorry for herself. She's not taking medication. She's learning. She's pushing herself beyond her comfort level. She didn't sleep for 4 years. You understand what that means? 4 years? Did she say that in class? You ever tell you guys?
She hasn't said that, but I am aware of that just from knowing her.
So 4 years means that's how stubborn she is. That's what it took to knock her on her ass to finally accept that she needs God in her life and she needs to use the energy she's cultivating to give to other people. The class is perfect for her. She gets to interact and take the focus off herself.
That's beautiful. So summing this up, it could be stop playing God, accept that everything happened for a reason that was perfect. Then understand why it happened and work on yourself.
I have an issue with everything happens for a reason. I have an issue with that expression because people say, what's the reason that a 6-year-old has to die? What reason could there possibly be for a 6-year-old child to die? So that's not a good way to look at things. You know what I'm saying? How do you justify to a mother and father and say, oh, there's a reason why your 6-year-old died? You're lucky if you don't get hit in the head with a chair.
So what phrase would you replace that with?
I would say there's an interesting phrase that, I mean, it could be appropriate, but not for people that just lost a child. You can't tell someone they lost their mom or their dad that this too is for the good. Yeah, well, good. I don't have my mom, I don't have my kid. What explain to me how that's good for me? You know what I mean? Yeah. So there is no phrase. You can't justify that. You can't tell a person that's lost a loved one that it's for the good.
Yeah.
But I see, I treated a call girl in New Mexico. She was a hooker, $2,000 a day kind of hooker. And she got healed in 2 sessions. And then I went to New York to treat a 6-year-old with lymphoma, and he died. Where you say to yourself, where's God in the equation? How's that possible? What did the kid do? Why she live? She has no morals, no standards, no whatsoever, sells her body every day. And he died and she lived. Why? because the kid lives within the confines of the parents' fears. And they imposed the medical community on him where he really didn't have that serious of an issue. His lymphatic, his lymph nodes were swollen because he was overwhelmed. And so they could have just drained them with exercise and breathing. It sounds crazy, but I promise you it's true. So they let the medical community, because of their fears, shoot him full of hormones. He swelled up and died. So he's confined. He doesn't have a decision. He doesn't have an ability to make his own choice. And the hookers, she has no attachment. She lives in the moment. She's not attached to outcome. She doesn't care about the past or the future. She lives completely in the moment. That's what he'll.
In this case, is that a case by case thing? Like with children, is it always like, as you said, the confines of the parents' belief system that, like,
very often. I'd have to. It is but case by case, but
yeah.
It's very often. I treated a kid who was 28 and he had grand mal seizures. And I couldn't put my finger on it. They came for like 4 retreats. In Texas, Vlad.
I think I remember this. Yeah.
And then I realized they're both mathematicians. They're both theory attached to the medical community. So because he never got to grow up, he would live 6 months and be fine. And then as soon as he wanted to date a girl, he started searching online to meet someone. He'd spaz out because he's busy judging himself, have a grand mal seizure, and regress. So they get to take care of him again. You understand? So he never gets to grow up because the spasm, the epileptic spasm, is his unwillingness to deal. And he escapes. And then he regresses. So he never got to grow up because he lives within the confines of their belief system, of their understanding, of their fears, of their calculations. They're very grounded, physical, material people. In Judaism, I don't mean to bring it up constantly because it's mine, but I just want you to know. There's something called bar mitzvah. You know what bar mitzvah is? I'm sure you heard of it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a party for 600 people on a boat. It's a technological phenomenon. When a child or a kid, a girl or a boy, live until they're 12 or 13 years old, 12 in the girl's case and 13 in the boy's. They live, and consciousness is constantly introduced to them that there's a God, that everything has a soul, that everything has a life, that everything needs to be elevated through prayer. Then the perception of the child is groomed to understand consciousness in a very broad-minded way. So then when they turn 12 or 13, the prayer for bar mitzvah are conscious spiritual keys that stimulate another flow of energy, and the child receives another kind of surge of energy which expands them and makes them responsible for being co-creators of reality and no longer living within the confines of the parents' fears. It's a phenomenon.
Yeah, that makes sense, because the umbilical cord gets cut when you're born, but there's also like an emotional umbilical cord that stays there, until you're 3 years old, and then starts slowly going away after 3, and then when you're a teenager, it should be severed completely.
Formative years. And when I found in these kids that are epileptic, some of them didn't have bar mitzvah. They didn't have that phenomenon that meant very often ignorant Jews in my community, especially fathers. They take their sons to a whorehouse. That's not the point. Or they let them have a drink. Oh, he's a man now. That's what defines a man? No. The point of it is that they end up being self-sufficient and no longer confined to the decisions of the parents and their constant meddling in their affairs.
And all cultures kind of have this rite of passage,
Yeah,
at
it's
some
very
point.
important. It's very important.
So we only have like a couple minutes left. So we're going to take a question. a question, if that's cool with you, and then
Of course.
we might continue that. Whitney, do you want to go ahead and read the question?
Yes. So we got
a person says she's 32 years old, right?
I don't know her age. Her name is Lehan. Do you need the last name, Vlad? First name is fine.
Okay.
My question to Vlad, I'm waking up at night because of back pain. If possible, I also have some trouble finding a partner. If you have any insight about that, that would be great. So back pain and
Do you want to give her her full name and age? Or?
I don't need it. I see it. It's fine. So it's self-absorbed behavior. No God, no ritual life. That's why the spine hurts. And constantly putting pressure on yourself to want to perform and to find a partner. So the pressure is created by constantly imagining, as I think his name is Momji. He says, kissing frogs. So, oh, he's the one. No, he's the one. No, he's the one. And that constant obsession, trying to look into the future, trying to search for a life partner, depletes the soul's energy, and the spine starts to collapse on itself because it has no support.
What would you say if this person was observant, like was an observant, at least observed Shabbat?
I've met observant people. I treated a renowned rabbi's wife that had a tumor in her breast the size of my palm. I mean, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Double mastectomy. They wanted to do everything. They ended up having a lumpectomy. I turned it into this with God's help, of course. It became a tiny lump. When I asked her, and they're brilliant people, brilliant people. They understand and know so much information. It's incredible. I said to her, how do you think you got this? God gave it to me. God gave me cancer. I mean, how ludicrous. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So, observant or not, I've seen observant people that are completely ignorant. Their understanding of conscious reality and technology is on the level of a 5-year-old, but they know vast amount of information. You know, like,
Okay.
and
There is a
conscious.
difference.
What do you say?
There is a difference between actually praying and connecting with God and letting that light come into your soul, right? So if you can say a prayer, you can observe whatever kind of ritual you do, but if you don't connect with that source and allow more light, it doesn't matter like what you do, right? Am I correct?
I think like
The reason Whitney brings up Orthodox people, because she's delved deeper into Judaism, what most people don't know is that it's a manual for conscious understanding the ins and outs of human experience and the spiritual experience. It's complete from beginning to end. It's a manual for Torah was given to humanity, not to the Jews. That's why 72% of the world observe the commandments. They came from Moses. So the point is that when you understand how much a rabbi, who's a rabbi means teacher, it's a master's in technological consciousness. You understand? It means they know Gemara, they know the 5 books of Moses, they know Torah, which is the same thing. They know
the Zohar,
Tanya, which is mystical understanding, Chassidut. They know Kabbalah. They have so much technology. It's not just praying. They have so much technology that it could blow your mind how much they know. They can be principals of a school. They're educators. They're literally educators of conscious technology. And yet their perception is they still humanize God. So it doesn't revolve around prayer. It's not like a Christian pastor or a Catholic priest. They're technologically savvy people. They understand the workings of the human experience and the spiritual experience.
And they have like in the morning blessings, it's one of the things that's recited is like one of the precepts for which you enjoy the fruits of in this world and in the world to come is concentration in prayer. Mm-hmm. So it is like they already would know it's important to have a intentional prayer practice. Yep. But for this person specifically, I was just asking that because maybe they do have a ritual life. And one of the things you had said was like, no ritual life. That helps support
it may
them.
sound like I constantly say that, but remember, I don't care if you're Buddhist, Zen Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, it doesn't matter. Whatever vibration you are, practice that vibration. Practice it so that it becomes your path. Then it will sustain you because it has its own morality. I don't have to subscribe to your religion. One's not better than the other. They just are. You're not better than me. I'm not better than you. You just are, means you came into that vibration because that's what's intended for you. So observe it. If you don't have a path and you're just kumbaya, potpourri different disciplines, you do yoga from Buddhism or Hinduism, you pray from Zoroastrianism, you sit in sweat lodges because you like Native Americans, you do drum circles, bullshit. It has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
We can do a bonfire and take some mollies.
I remember when I first started working with you, you were like, I just sat there for like a year and a half, probably, just like, how is this motherfucker just like tricking me in all of these instances? And, it's just like after so long of seeing just phenomenal shit, you just start to accept that it's real and then kind of work through your doubt around it. But one of the things you said was like the only purpose of mediumship and like any of this phenomenal shit is to show people that reality has no limits. So like this is to introduce the idea of an unlimited reality to people. And I since then have realized, like, if your faith doesn't provide you with like a connection to something where you believe that it gives you an unlimited reality, then like that to me is an indicator of some lack of faith. Like my granny had COVID and she was in the hospital praying and remembered some family member who's told her that he does deep breathing exercises every morning. And she said, okay, Jesus, here I go. And she sat there and she was deep breathing for however many hours. And she was out of the hospital in 24 hours. My granny's 85 years old. And she had scarring on her lungs before she went into the hospital that was like significantly better when she came out of the hospital from having COVID. And she goes to the doctor and she said, and the doctor said, I believe this is a miracle. And I just said, well, Jesus Christ healed me. That's what happened. But that's my granny's level of faith. You can find plenty of Christians that don't have that same level of understanding of what like a connection to their God can do for them.
Well, he's flagging us to stop. I'm going to tell you something. Are we good? I treated this guy, his name is Bob. His caretakers met me. I had a lecture someplace in South Jersey. I saw a bunch of people and then lectured a bunch of folks about, whatever concepts. And she approached me and says, listen, I take care of a guy who has Lou Gehrig's. And his family's broke. I mean, they don't have money. They can't pay you. And they're basically living in a trailer. And he's on he's a breathing machine. He can't speak. He poops on himself. So I said, I tell you what, if you get him on the speakerphone, this was early 2000. If you put him on a speakerphone 3 days a week, I'll treat him for 20 minutes at a time. Well, I treated him like 12 sessions. She called me and said, listen, he's getting out of bed with my help. Meaning, with her help, he can get out of bed. He started speaking. He started breathing normal. He stopped pooping on himself. So I said, you know what? I want to come see him. It was a 2.5 hour drive in South Jersey. So I go there and he's super excited to see me. And as I start treating him, we spoke for a little while. And can't believe that he's getting out of bed. And all of a sudden, this little guy, like kind of husky little toughie, comes in the doorway and he says to me, you can't treat my father. And I said, until he tells me that I can't, I'm going to do what I want to do. He said, well, only Jesus heals. I said, well, Jesus ain't here, but I am, and your father is walking. So he said, well, I don't want you doing that anymore. And I can stop you physically. I said, well, good luck. So I look outside, and he brought two guys with him to help me understand that they don't want me to come here. And I really felt for Bob because they already wrote him off as if he was gone. And the truth is, he got healed. If I was able to treat him further, he'd have been walking, he'd been okay. But I couldn't because I wasn't going to risk my life with this douchebag who thinks, the master of Christianity is coming back, and if he's not here, then that's it. Life is over. So my point to the story is that people's understanding of what healing is so limited and so mediocre, less than mediocre. They think that their spiritual master that they subscribe to is the only possibility. You can accept Jesus as your savior, but remember that it's a master soul that lived in the human experience, and that master soul, if you subscribe to it, can lead you into a healing experience.
Yeah.
And that's what your granny did.
Exactly. I was gonna say that's my granny shit right there. Is like, okay, I asked for this and God said to do it this way, and this is how I'm doing it.
No, I treated 50 people from COVID. Every single one, 5 were in ICU. Every single one got healed. You know how? I forced them to breathe.
Yeah. I said, Granny, you just breathe. You just like made your lungs expand.
But I think Vlad has to go, so it's going to be a good point to end it. But we're going to put both like our social media and Vlad's social media, so anyone can contact him or contact us, and we'll put the email where they can send their questions.
I should probably change my name on.
And thank you so much.
Thanks, Vlad.
Thank you, Vlad.